Hi, everybody. So nice to see so many familiar faces in person for the first time in so long. And thank you all for being here. So first of all, I want to start, how and when did NFTs become such a big thing in fashion? I mean, we saw it on our website when we started writing stories about it, and they performed very well. But Jeff, maybe we can start with you, and can you just give a little backstory on how this came about, essentially?
We've been, as Ami mentioned, we've been wearing digital fashion for quite some time. Certainly within the gaming sphere, millions of dollars are being transacted there. For me, it really started probably around December of 2020 when you started seeing actual assets being developed. Certainly Benoit and what he was doing with his team around footwear was super exciting. But it really does kind of go back much farther into the gaming sphere, even though there may not be direct connections with what's happening in the NFT space with games. But we've been here for a while, and the truth is I'll take my son as an example. He's a 6-year-old kid who loves spending his time in Minecraft and spends $50 of dad's money every month buying a new shirt, a new helmet, and I think that was really why that was, at least for me, a moment where I was like, okay, something's going on. And I think over the last year and a half, we've seen tremendous moves into dressing our digital selves.
Matt, when did you think, I have to think about this and start writing about it?
Yeah, well, I think I guess I see the first awareness of NFTs coming up in brands trying to protect their intellectual property on the internet. The brands in the athletic footwear space, which I focus on, are very, very concerned about protecting the intellectual property in the physical world and have spent tremendous amount of money on that. When we saw them begin to sign deals to start to create NFTs, the primary reason for that, I believe, was their desire to protect their intellectual property on the internet as well. And so it's sort of a tangential introduction of NFTs into the space as well.
Ejaaz, from the other side of things, when did you start to notice, fashion industry people and brands were going to you, and also just the consumer was buying more clothing in this world?
Yeah, I think the main example that I saw back then was when people started using NFTs as a new way to communicate who they are, right? And to use a term, I guess, it's more of an online digital flex, right? So if you kind of think about the evolution of goods, which I'm sure sounds super exciting to you guys, but bear with me for a second, right? You had your basic goods, which keeps you alive. Then you have your luxury goods. And for the longest period of time, luxury goods have been physical. Why? Because you can kind of hold them, own them. They're unique, authentic to a brand. And this kind of progression to digital value has happened to a lot of things. Money is now digital, information, you can send text, Twitter, all that kind of stuff, right? And the question then becomes, what is that next step for physical items? Why would you want to do that? Well, it's much easier to transact as a global audience and all that kind of stuff. And you might say, well, I'll still prefer the physical item. But the bet here, and it was mentioned on the talk just before this, is in the years to come, the world, your digital world, so your online identity, your online social media presence, your online persona, is going to become more important to some degree than your physical one. So the idea is, how do fashion industries get involved with involving their kind of community and presence and influence there? And that's when I started seeing a lot of brands doing it via a social online presence.
Yeah, I mean, if we're sitting at home and not around anyone else except for people online, why else buy stuff than to wear it around other people? So that kind of makes sense. But Imran alluded to this. There's been a lot of talk about what's happening with NFTs in the market right now, and I want to get to that. But maybe first, can we go through some examples of, examples of successes of NFTs with brands? Matt, as someone who has written about what you don't think NFTs are capable of, do you have any examples of that you think have been successful and have worked for the brand and you think are admired?
Yeah, I think one good example is what Adidas has done, and where they're really integrating the NFT experience with their membership, their loyalty program. And so they're enhancing the loyalty program via NFTs and using NFTs as a way to bring more people into their loyalty program. So I think it's more about the utility of the NFT as opposed to the NFT in and of itself that I would use as a good example.
What do you think most of the brands are doing that's not working?
Well, I think one really interesting aspect of this, and Imran touched on it in one of his pieces, was that the amount of energy that's required to maintain the blockchain to authenticate these NFTs. And we have so many brands in the sports space who are vocally committed to being more sustainable. And yet the NFT as it currently exists is the very opposite of sustainability. And so I'm still having trouble reconciling that with the brand's position that they're trying to be more sustainable in the manufacture of their products and the circularity of their products, and then are doing NFTs in addition to that. So,
Ejaaz, can you explain exactly what takes so much energy? Because people say this all the time, but to be honest, it's really hard for me to understand, like, what is taking so much energy and what are people doing to make it less impactful?
Sure, yeah. So firstly, I think it's a really valuable point, right? It does consume quite a bit of energy, and obviously it's all relative to whichever industry you want to kind of compare it to, right? The reason why it's taking up a portion of energy or energy in general is because of like the first version of how blockchains were built. And blockchain is like the underlying tech that kind of supports all of this, right? And as you can imagine, it was a very bold idea, but we had very immature tools at that time. It was an initial concept and idea, and we kind of built that out, right? And because of that, it uses quite an older model, right? Let's just call it an older mechanism. What's happening now, or the solutions now, and they're, by the way, currently in existence and you can use them, is kind of like an updated, it's like a version 2. And it uses a hell of a lot less energy. It's cheaper to create these things, and it's much quicker to be able to send and interact. So I would say the solutions already exist right now, and it's only scaling upwards from now.
Jeff, you talk to a lot of brands who are wading into this world. What do you think? What do you tell them? Like, how do you advise them to get into this? What kinds of things work? You know, is it about the press that you get if you sell a $1 million pair of sneakers, or is it about what Matt's talking about, which is like community engagement and all of that stuff?
I think it's both and a lot more. And I think we haven't really even begun to touch exactly where this is going to go. I asked essentially 2 questions, or rather one's a point and the one's a question. When it comes to fashion, when it comes to sneakers, when it comes to wearables, is it an NFT that needs a physical good, or is it a physical good that needs an NFT? And that's just a way of framing, you know, how are you looking at this and how is this going to impact your business? More importantly, how is it going to impact your customer? And then today, I think the majority of what we're seeing within Web3 and within the NFT space, if we're looking at assets, it's either a moment to have a marketing moment, which I think is great. You can have a campaign. I'm currently working on something like that right now with a men's cancer foundation, in really trying to raise money through a campaign that is gamified and helping men check themselves, basically. So I think there's some good in that. But the other side could be very transformative. And transformative in the sense of the technology that you use, and certainly we saw that in the earlier slides that McKinsey presented, how you have to invest into tech. But more importantly, how it allows you to then get closer to your community. And I think community is a really important word here because, you know, your community is made up of not only fans, but also consumers. And how you begin to take, say, the theories or ideologies of Web3, which constantly are being changed, by the way, they're just evolving all the time. How do you use those to apply a layer that allows for your consumer to either be closer to what you're doing or have a little bit more transparency into what you're doing? And I think those are the 2 main mechanisms that at least I put in front of in front of brands and certainly the C-suite, Matt makes a very valid point. I think one of the very clear future uses is in utility for incentivization and membership. I think there's a lot that can be done there, and we're really only beginning to explore that.
Do you have an example of one of the more marketing-focused things that someone has done that was really effective, that looked good, that got them a lot of great press, et cetera, that you kind of use as an example to show other brands?
Yeah, so I'll use a streetwear example because it's really close to me, and I think brands that are within street fashion tend to be very early adopters of tech, and I'll use one that, if you're familiar, people will know, that Atom Bomb Squad, which is a project that came out of a brand out of LA called The Hundreds. In many ways, it actually has helped propel their business to a new consumer, but they're using it as a way to do gatekeeping, and gatekeeping meaning that when you used to go to a club, you're either you're on the VIP list or you're in the line, and the same is a little bit true for the project that they're doing. By being a holder, and I'm sure everyone's heard this term before, by holding their NFT, there's a set of access points that they give you. And they've been able to actually release a variety of clothing collections as well as collaborative collections with some of the biggest projects within the world of NFTs. Bored Ape, I think they even did, I think they just did a Dead Fellas collection, and if you're not familiar with Bored Apes or Dead Fellas,
I'm sure most people in this audience are.
That's probably a good starting point if you're stepping into this world. And I think that's one example. Matt mentioned Adidas as well. I think they've done a very good job of embracing this idea of collaboration within Web3 and being able to offer their consumers something. So the truth is, in my mind, it's not a truth, it's my opinion, sorry. In my opinion, what we're going to do with Web3 is allow for consumers to touch brands differently. And I think that that's quite exciting. We have a lot of things to work through, from the energy issue, which is certainly being worked on. And quite frankly, if you're going to step into Web3, in my mind, it has to be better than what you're doing in Web 2. Otherwise, you might as well just keep doing what you're doing in Web 2. Retrofitting your current model into Web 3 for the sake of Web 3 is not the answer. There has to be a goal and certainly a certain level of success that's coming from, or at least not just success, but forward momentum in using Web 3 that should impact your business.
So, Matt, the way Jeff describes this, it seems like super positive for these brands. But yeah, you mentioned the sustainability aspect of it, but it also seems like you're generally a bit annoyed with NFTs overall. You wrote a wonderful op-ed for us, and I'm just curious, why does it annoy you, other than the fact that it's internet-y, and what about it bothers you a little bit?
Well, I think one of the other issues that I see here is there is so much room for fraud and illegal activity, and it's really got nothing to do with the good aspects of it. But there's this whole dark side, if you will, to NFTs, and the head of OpenSea said the majority of NFTs that are on their website are fraud. First of all, how do you? I hope he's not in the room here. But how do you run a business when you know that there's that kind of fraud going on? So I think the unregulated aspect of it, the money laundering aspect of it, the illegal activity aspect of it, all of that is very troublesome. And it really has nothing to do with the concept of NFTs themselves. It's more about how they're being executed.
You could say the same for the diamond industry, though. They have all the same, it's 70, 80 years of that marketing, but it's the same thing. So do you think it's just because it's so early and there will be more regulation?
And I just think there's more instances that I continue to hear about of fraud and misuse of them. So, but going back to what Jeff said, the whole idea of building community is absolutely critical for brands today. And if this is an effective way of doing that, I think there is some utility here. Again, I don't want to make it sound like there's zero utility in this.
Ejaaz, how do you convince skeptics like Matt that it
How do I convince
works?
Matt? Yeah. So I think your point around like fraud, it definitely exists. I think I need to check the data points on it being like the majority, but it definitely does exist, and we should monitor that and reduce that to an absolute minimum. I agree. The way I kind of like speak to people about this is, I sort of mentioned it earlier, right? It's a new way to present yourself in a world that's becoming increasingly digital, right? We're speaking about the metaverse for a lot of today, right? And people haven't really defined what that is, but we're all agreed that it's going to be a much more digital world. So if that's the case, how do you kind of formulate that? And I'm not going to lie, like we're very early in this space right now. Jeff's mentioned Atom Bomb Squad, right? Which is kind of going down the token gated community route, right? Where it's like, oh, I get exclusive access to these drops or these conversations and stuff. But at its core, it's involving the community in more ways. Brands are looking for more ways to engage with their consumers, right? How can I interact with them? How can they represent us to an extent? So offering them new ways in an online way is I believe, the way forward and how I kind of represent NFTs.
Do you think at some point, and Jeff, maybe, I don't, any of you actually might want to answer this. So do you think at some point this could be enough money for a brand that if they're a public company or something, they're breaking out, there's online retail, offline retail, digital, yeah. I don't even know what you would call it. It's Web3, maybe it's just going to be called Web3 retail.
I think
or
it's just
something?
another P&L, right? You're going to have another P&L in your business that could be focused on what's happening in digital goods. And just as a very plain example, imagine a world where you go to a retail page to buy a shirt and it's coming in small, extra large, small, medium, extra large, and NFT, or the NFT is just part of what you're buying, right? It's just, they're one and the same. When you purchase it, you're receiving some token. And then what gets interesting from the metaverse side, and I would agree to some extent, we're still trying to define what that is, but I think we're actually, at least in my view, there are certainly examples of us living in a sort of metaversal experience, but there's going to be thousands of different worlds that we'll be able to interact with. In the same way that, currently we can go to thousands of different web properties and social media and follow social media pages. That token in some way will give you access or will allow you to be part of a community in that sense. And I think those are the things that I think will get really interesting. But we're very far from it. And to be honest, anybody that's telling you that you're late is just, it's not true. We are extremely early in this. And I'm old enough to be on stage and remember Web 1, and I saw that Wild West aspect of it that Matt's talking about. No doubt about it. We're in the middle of that. We're in the middle of people trying to push the line as far as they can and then being pulled back. And Matt's absolutely right. From a brand perspective, you really do have to protect your IP. You certainly are seeing that with what Nike is doing. Certainly the lawsuit that Nike's placed on StockX around first usage of a digital asset and locking up a physical good and vaulting, which I think is quite interesting. And yeah, we're getting there. Regulation is something that people fear a lot in Web3. I happen to think it's going to be quite important in, number one, bringing stability to these issues that Matt's brought up, and second, in ensuring the average person who is still skeptic or hasn't stepped into this, that it's a safe place to transact. Because the truth is, in some ways, it's still, it can be a touchy thing. You really have to watch out for your own security. And I think that's the part that people may not be ready for. But we got to get to a place where it is a safe environment for, quite frankly, everyone to use. Yeah.
So final question. There was a Wall Street Journal story yesterday, and the headline was NFT market is flatlining. So I look it up, and there's all these other websites that are like, Wall Street Journal story, not true, blah, blah, blah. So A, is it flatlining? B, is that just a blip because we're just at the beginning? Ejaaz, let's start with you.
Yeah, so there's no denying there's been huge euphoria in NFTs over the last year and a half. And like with any new piece of tech, there's a lot of hype that can often kind of supersede what the actual value is from a technological perspective. But that was the same as what we saw with Web 1, right? Where we saw the .com boom and we saw all these websites pop up, and what happens is like there's this just constant cycle of innovation. And what's undoubtedly true is every cycle, there's a level up of the tech and how that works and the value that that brings to people, right? So right now, we've had a discussion and you've asked about utility and we've given you some examples, but most of us have said we're still really early. If we have this conversation in a few years' time, I think that'll be very different. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
I think wallet usage has slowed down, and quite frankly, I think we need to get that up. The next 100 million wallets that come online, I think are going to be the most important wallets. You know, those of us that kind of came in early, it's great, but we really need everyone else to feel it, understand it. And I think until you actually have, you know, a crypto wallet, certainly Coinbase is one of the ones I prefer, no ad. It's just, it's an experience that you really have to feel to have that aha moment and say, oh, okay. Even if it is somebody putting, you know, a doodle or, you know, a World of Women NFT into your wallet, you sort of have to experience that to feel exactly what it is. And again, I think the next 100 million wallets will be quite important. But right now, it is a little bit of a flat line. We need to get more usage. But the truth is, in terms of transactions within current wallets, they are just going up and up.
Matt, really quickly, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think this is really a function of so many things we've seen during this pandemic era of people trying to get rich quick, and everybody's going to make money. And whether it's buying crypto or buying NFTs or buying GameStop stock. And by the way, everybody can't get rich. When somebody gets rich means somebody lost out on the other side. So, you know, I think that's part of why we're seeing this flat line a little bit as well. And it's very difficult to measure where we are here. I think that there's no repository of data out there that tells us the whole scene. We get little views of here and here and here, but we don't get the whole picture.
Yeah, well, I hope some people are still rich from it. Thank you guys so much. This is great. Thanks, everybody.